the Hinterkaifeck killings. It was the evening of 31st March 1922 when 6 residents of a small Bavarian farmhouse located around 70 kilometers or 43 miles north of Munich, Germany, were found killed by an unknown intruder. Andreas Gruber, age 63, and his wife Cecilia Gruber, age 72, their widowed daughter Victoria Gabriel, age 35, Victoria's children, Cecilia, age 7, and Joseph, age 2, and the maid Maria Baumgartner, age 44, were all slain with a mattock, sometimes known as a grub axe. A mattock is a hand tool used for excavation, cutting, and chopping, very similar to a pickaxe. It has a long handle for grip and a sturdy head with a vertical sharp axe blade. The weirdest part of the case is that for 3 days, the perpetrator or perpetrators resided with the victims' bodies. During this period, they ate the food in the house, fed the animals on the property, and lit fires in the fireplace. According to the investigation, the victims were lured near the barn one by one before brutally ending them. The large number of persons who had interacted with the crime scene, transferred corpses and things, and even cooked and ate meals in the kitchen restricted initial investigations. The day after the bodies were discovered, court physician Johann Baptist Amuller even conducted an autopsy in the barn. Evidence suggested that the younger Cecilia had been alive for several hours after the attack, having ripped her hair out in clumps while laying in the straw. 4 of the deceased bodies were discovered piled in the barn. The case remains unsolved to this day due to lack of conclusive evidence. The incident is regarded as one of the most brutal and puzzling crimes in German history. The Boy in the Box, Philadelphia, 1957. On February 25, 1957, a 4-year-old male body was found in a bizarre posture. It was undressed entirely, malnourished, beaten, and was found on the roadside in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Referred to as Boy in the Box, Boy in a Box, or America's Unknown Child, the body remained unidentified until very recently, when investigators identified Joseph Augustus Zarelli thanks to DNA testing. When discovered, Zarelli's body was covered in a checkered blanket inside a cardboard box that once held a bassinet sold by JCPenney. Joseph looked to be clean and well-groomed, with a recent but immature haircut and clipped fingernails, despite the fact that he had been subjected to several violent attacks previous to his passing, as evidenced by multiple bruises on his body. He was also severely malnourished. His body was covered with scars, many of which were strangely surgical, particularly on his ankle, crotch, and chin. Authorities think Zarelli passed away as a result of homicide by blunt force trauma. Despite the uproar and curiosity over the years, the boy's name remained unknown for more than 50 years. On November 30, 2022, the Philadelphia Police Department stated that officers had identified the boy using DNA and genealogy databases. On December 8, 2022, more than 65 years after his body was discovered, he was publicly recognized. Despite the identification, the actual circumstances leading to his death remain unknown, and the case is still classified as an active homicide investigation. Remington Bristow, a dedicated investigator who pursued the case until his death in 1993, believed that Zarelli might have suffered abuse and torture at a foster home just 1.5 miles, 2.5 kilometers from where his body was found. During an estate sale at the foster home, Bristow came upon a bassinet identical to the one offered at JCPenney. He also spotted blankets hanging outside that looked identical to the one used to wrap the boy's body when they discovered him. Bristow suspected the kid was the son of the foster home's owner's stepdaughter, and that his body was disposed of so that the stepdaughter would not be revealed as an unwed mother. However, the police found that all of the foster children listed were alive, and a re-examination by police detectives concluded that the family was most likely not involved. In 1998, Philadelphia Police Lieutenant Tom Augustine, in charge of the investigation, and several members of the Vidocq Society, a group of retired cops and profilers, interrogated the foster father once again, who revealed he later married the stepdaughter. However, the coincidence wasn't pursued any further, and thus the case went cold. Javed Iqbal Case. Javed Iqbal Mughal, Pakistan's most fearsome predator, admitted to the unthinkable, the savage killing of 100 minors aged 6 to 16. His victims weren't just slaughtered, they were strangled, mutilated, and dissolved in acid, leaving no trace but misery. The news of his misdeeds sent shockwaves throughout South Asia, presenting a nightmare beyond comprehension. In December 1999, Iqbal wrote a letter to the police and Kawar Naeem Hashmi, the head news editor of a Lahore daily, confessing to abducting and harassing nearly 100 defenseless boys aged 6 to 16. He claimed to have strangled and dismembered the victims, who were primarily runaways or orphans living on the streets of Lahore. After harassing them, he disposed of their remains in vats of hydrochloric acid that he subsequently spilled into a nearby river. Police and reporters discovered bloodstains on the walls and the floor, the chain that Iqbal claimed he used to strangle the boys, and photos of several of his victims in plastic bags. These things were meticulously labeled, with handwritten booklets including names and ages. 2 vats of acid containing partially dissolved human remains were also left for the police to uncover, along with a message indicating that the dead in the home had not been disposed of on purpose in order for authorities to discover them. In his letter, Iqbal indicated that he had accomplished his crimes and intended to kill himself in the Ravi River. However, after unsuccessfully dragging the river with nets, authorities started the greatest search in Pakistani history. 4 accomplices, adolescent lads who had shared Iqbal's 3-bedroom apartment, were apprehended in Sohawa. Within days, one of them passed away in police custody, with a post-mortem indicating that force was used against him. The police claimed he jumped from a window of his own will. Iqbal said that his motivation for executing the murders was rage over a perceived injustice at the hands of Lahore police. According to Iqbal's confession, his mother's death after witnessing his social, economic, and symbolic status deteriorate as a result of his attack and arrest had broken a hell over him. He thus resolved to make 100 mothers suffer and cry for their sons, as his late mother had been forced to do for him. Javed Iqbal eventually faced the justice he had escaped for so long. After surrendering to a popular newspaper, the court imposed the ultimate penalty that mirrored the horrors he had inflicted on his victims. However, the horrible execution was avoided due to Pakistan's dedication to human rights regulations. Instead, on October 8, 2001, Iqbal was discovered lifeless in his jail cell, hanging with his accomplice. Whether it was suicide or premeditated punishment, one thing is certain: his reign of terror ended in the shadows, as black as the murders he perpetrated. Dyatlov Pass Incident. On the night of February 1, 1959, 9 experienced hikers, guided by Igor Dyatlov, established a camp in Soviet Russia's frozen Ural Mountains. They had no clue it would be their last night alive. Days later, when their remains were discovered spread across the snow, detectives were left with more questions than answers. Following the discovery of the group's remains, Soviet officials conducted an investigation and decided that 6 of them died of hypothermia, while the remaining 3 died of physical violence. 1 victim sustained significant skull injury, 2 suffered serious chest injuries, and a 3rd had a minor break in his head. 4 victims were discovered in flowing water in a stream, with 3 of them having injured soft tissue of the head and face, 2 with missing eyes, 1 with a missing tongue, and 1 with missing brows. Several explanations have been proposed to explain the inexplicable fatalities, including animal assaults, hypothermia, an avalanche, katabatic winds, infrasound-induced fear, military participation, or a mix of these reasons. Theories went rampant. Some felt an avalanche had driven them out of their tent, although there was no convincing confirmation of this. Others suspected they had been the victims of a covert Soviet military operation or perhaps a UFO encounter. Paranormal enthusiasts stated that an unknown creature had pursued them, making them abandon their tents and other tools. The Soviet authorities subsequently determined that they perished as a result of an unknown compelling force, a vague explanation that encouraged even more stories to arise. The circumstances surrounding the body's discovery added to the mystery. Some of the hikers had significant internal injuries, including crushed ribs and cracked skulls, yet their skin remained intact, as if they had been struck by a powerful supernatural force. Now, more than 60 years later, a scientific examination explains what happened to Dyatlov's crew. According to a report released last month, the trekkers were asleep when a minor but catastrophic slab avalanche hit. A slab avalanche, as opposed to the snow avalanches seen in movies, occurs when a big block of ice slips down a hill. A stone of this size smashed a portion of the hiker's tent, injuring 3 and causing the rest of the group to escape in their nightwears. Texarkana Moonlight Murders. In early 1946, a series of 4 unsolved serial killings and related violent crimes took people by surprise in the Texarkana region of the United States. They were attributed to an anonymous offender, famously called the Phantom of Texarkana, the Phantom Killer, or the Phantom Slayer. This still unidentified culprit is accused of attacking 8 people, 5 of whom passed away not long after. From February 22nd to May 3rd, the attacks took place at night on weekends, primarily targeting couples. The first 3 attacks were on lovers' lanes or calm stretches of road in Texas. where the fourth occurred at a remote farmhouse in Arkansas. Several newspapers reported on the killings both nationally and internationally, causing alarm in Texarkana throughout the summer. Residents armed themselves and locked themselves inside at dark, while police patrolled the streets and neighborhoods. Stores ran out of weapons, ammo, locks, and other defensive equipment. The killings were investigated at the local, county, state, and federal levels. The Texarkana killings were aired both nationally and internationally, and they undoubtedly left an effect on many individuals. Perhaps the later famous Zodiac killer studied the Phantom Killer, as there are a lot of similarities between the two. The Isdal Woman Mystery. On November 29, 1970, a man and his two young daughters went hiking in the mountains of the north face of Urijk in Norway, in an area known as Isdalen or the Ice Valley. It was also called Dedsdalen or Death Valley, partly because of the area's history of self-exiting in the Middle Ages and more recent hiking accidents. They discovered the burned body of a woman among some rubble. Her face was unrecognizable, her body was badly charred, and traces of gasoline were discovered beneath her. Nearby, detectives discovered a strange assortment of artifacts, including charred paper, a fur cap, an empty liquor bottle, and garments without labels. There were no personal documents, therefore identification was difficult. 3 days later, authorities discovered 2 pieces of luggage at Bergen train station that belonged to the lady. Inside, they found wigs, cosmetics, clothes, money from several nations, and a notepad with cryptic codes. All labels had been erased from her stuff, and she had at least 8 false names, implying a life of seclusion. Autopsy reports found that she died of a combination of carbon monoxide poisoning and a deadly amount of sleeping drugs, with soot in her lungs indicating she was alive when she burnt. Her jaw and teeth were taken for study, which added to the mystery. Police tracked her movements around Norway and Europe, where she slept in many hotels under several identities, regularly moving rooms, and spoke in German, French, and bad English. Witnesses described her wearing wigs and smelled like garlic, and one overheard her conversing to a man in German. Despite intensive investigations, including composite sketches and an Interpol notice, her exact identity has never been revealed. Authorities declared her death a suicide, but many suspect she was murdered, possibly by a Cold War spy whose secrets disappeared with her. The Isdal Woman mystery continues to be one of history's longest-standing unsolved mysteries. Keddie Murders. On the morning of April 12, 1981, in the little community of Keddie, California, was the scene of one of the most violent and baffling unsolved murders in American history. The Keddie killings are an unsolved quadruple homicide, and the victims were Glenna Susan Sue Sharp, Tina Louise Sharp, John Stephen Sharp, and John's friend Dana Hall Wingate. The incident took place at the Keddie Resort's house number 28, and Sue's 14-year-old daughter Sheila discovered the bodies of Wingate, Sue, and John Sharp on the morning of April 12th. Luckily, she had been sleeping at a friend's house the night before. Interestingly, Sue's 2 younger boys, Rick and Greg, as well as their friend Justin Smart, were also in the house, but were not injured. Tina's body was missing from the scene, adding more questions to the incident. Tina remained missing until April 1984, when her skull and many other bones were discovered at Camp 18, California, near Feather Falls in Butte County, some 62 miles from Keddie. Sue, John, and Dana were ended brutally, with 2 bloodied knives and 1 hammer discovered at the location of the crime. The killings were all committed in the living room, according to blood spatter evidence found inside the home. Sue was discovered lying on her side near the living room sofa, naked from the waist down and bound with a blue bandana and her own undergarments, tied with tape. She had been stabbed in the chest and her throat horizontally, with the wound going through her larynx and nicking her spine, and there was an impression on the side of her head that matched the buttstock of an American airgun. John's neck was cut clean. Dana had suffered severe head injuries and had been forcefully and fatally strangled. 1 or more hammers struck John and Dana's skulls, causing blunt force damage. According to autopsy reports, Sue and John died as a result of knife wounds and blunt force injuries, while Dana died of asphyxiation. Multiple leads and individuals were investigated in the subsequent years, but no charges were brought. Several fresh leads were reported in the 21st century, including the finding of a hammer in a pond in 2016 and the identification of new DNA evidence. Murder on the Lake. The Lake Bodom killings are an unsolved homicide case in Finland that left 3 teenage campers dead and another critically wounded. The crime is one of the most notorious in contemporary Finnish history. On June 5, 1960, between 4 and 6 a.m., near Lake Bodom in Espoo-Uusimaa, Maya Ermeli Björklund and Anya Tulukimaki, all 15 years old, and Seppo Boisman, 18 years old, were slain by stabbing and blunt force injuries to their skulls while sleeping inside a tent. The fourth kid, Niels Gustafsson, then 18, was discovered outside the tent with fractured facial bones and knife wounds. Despite thorough investigations, the murderer was never found, and different ideas about the killer's identity have circulated over the years. Gustafsson was suddenly arrested on suspicion of the killings in 2004, but he was acquitted the following year. Murder of Arliss Perry. Arliss K. Perry, a 19-year-old American bride, was killed on October 12, 1974, inside Stanford Memorial Church on the campus of Stanford University in California. The murder sat unsolved for more than 4 decades before authorities recognized Stephen Blake Crawford as the suspect via DNA analysis in 2018. A young couple got into a disagreement about the tire pressure in their car at 11:30 p.m. on October 12, 1974. Perry informed her husband that she wanted to pray alone inside the Stanford Memorial Church, and the two split. Bruce grew concerned when his wife did not come home by 3:00 a.m., so he contacted Stanford police to report her missing. However, authorities from the Santa Clara County Sheriff's Office arrived at the church and discovered that all of the outside doors were closed. Stephen Crawford, a former Stanford police officer, claimed to have discovered Perry's body at 5:45 a.m. on October 13th in the church's east transept near the altar. She was discovered face up with her hands clasped over her chest. An ice pick was poking out of the back of her head, but the handle had broken off and was gone. There was also evidence of strangling. According to police, Perry was undressed from the waist down. A 3-foot or almost 1-meter altar candle was put in her genitals and another between her breasts. Her jeans were placed over her legs in a diamond pattern. Crawford told police he closed up the church just after midnight after detecting no movement inside. He also stated, which was subsequently proven to be incorrect, that he rechecked the doors about 2 a.m. and found them still locked. When Crawford arrived at the church at 5:45 a.m. to open it for the day, he discovered the west side door open and had been pushed from the inside. Investigators discovered sperm cells on a kneeling pillow near Perry's body. They also discovered a partial palm print on one of the candles. The semen and print did not match Bruce or Crawford. The case remained open, and the Santa Clara County District Attorney's and Sheriff's Office's cold case team examined it on a regular basis. However, a more refined DNA test in 2018 firmly tied Crawford to the crime. On June 28, when police came at Crawford's house on Camden Avenue in San Jose, California, 20 miles or 32 kilometers from Stanford University with a search warrant, Crawford locked his door and self-exited with a revolver before he could be apprehended. The lead mask case. 1966, Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. A small child was flying a kite on a hill when he came upon something right out of a sci-fi horror film. 2 guys dressed in formal uniforms lying motionless on the ground. They were dressed in waterproof jackets and, most weirdly, had lead masks over their eyes. There was no blood or indications of struggle, only a cryptic notepad and some damp towels. The remains were discovered by a small group of police and firemen the next day. The bodies were lying close to each other, partially hidden by grass. Each body wore a formal suit, an eye mask made of lead, and a waterproof coat. There were no signs of serious trauma or struggle. Next to the bodies, authorities discovered an empty water bottle and a packet containing 2 damp towels. A little notepad was also found with the mysterious directions: 16:30, be at the specified location. 18:30, consume pills. Following action, shield metals await signal mask. The 2 men were later identified as Manuel Pereira de Cruz and Miguel Jose Viana, both working as electronics technicians from Campos dos Goitacazes, a village located several kilometers northeast of Rio de Janeiro. Following an inquiry, detectives pieced together a believable account of the men's final days. Cruz and Viana departed Campos de Goitacazes on August 17th with the declared intention of purchasing work-related items. The 2 guys subsequently took a bus to Niterói, arriving at 2:30 p.m. Evidence indicates that the waterproof jackets were purchased at a nearby shop, as well as 1 bottle of water from a neighboring pub. The waitress at the bar characterized Miguel as very nervous and noted that he regularly checked his watch. That was the last time they were seen alive, and it is assumed that they traveled directly from the bar to the location where they were discovered. There were no evident injuries identified at the scene or at the subsequent autopsy, which took place weeks later. The coroner's office was quite busy at the time, and when the autopsy was ultimately performed, The internal organs of the two deceased were much too deteriorated for accurate testing. Eventually, the case went cold, leaving people with bizarre theories and conspiracies. Villisca Axe Murders. The Villisca Axe killings happened during the evening and early morning of June 9th to 10th, 1912, in Villisca, Iowa, in the United States. 6 Moore family members and 2 guests were discovered bludgeoned in their home. All 8 victims, including 6 youngsters, sustained serious head injuries from an axe. A protracted inquiry uncovered multiple suspects, one of whom was tried twice. The first trial resulted in a hung jury, while the second concluded in an acquittal. Doctors established that the murders took place between midnight and 5 a.m. 2 wasted cigarettes in the attic indicated that the killer or killers waited patiently. According to the official tour, no smoke was discovered in the attic until the Moore family and the Stillinger visitors were sleeping. The killer or killers started in the master bedroom, where Josiah and Sarah Moore were asleep. Josiah took more axe strikes than any other victim, and his face was so badly sliced that his eyes were entirely gone. The ceiling in his chamber was also gouged from when the killer lifted the axe to kill him. Strangely, the killer or killers used the axe blade on Sarah and the blunt end on the other victims. Herman, Mary Catherine, Arthur, and Paul were subsequently bludgeoned in the head in the same manner as their parents. The murderer then returned to the master bedroom to inflict additional blows on the elder Moores, knocking over a bloodied shoe from the previous attack before heading downstairs to the guest bedroom and murdering Ina and Lena. A 4-pound slab of bacon seemed to be removed from the icebox and placed next to the axe shortly after. During their search, investigators discovered undisturbed food and bloody water on the kitchen table. Except for Lena Stillinger, investigators suspected that all of the victims were sleeping at the time of their murder. They believed she was conscious and attempted to fight back, since she was discovered lying crosswise on the bed with a defensive cut on her arm. Lena was lying on her stomach with her rear in the air. Lena's body had also been relocated and her underwear removed. Her leg had been positioned to display her genitals. This led law authorities to suspect that the perpetrator or killers sexually abused her or attempted to do so. Later research found no proof of this. But that wasn't the only strange detail in this case. Investigators found every mirror in the home was draped with blankets, cloths, or any other form of covering. Even garments were taken from the dressers to cover the mirrors completely. The home underwent renovations in the 1990s and is now known as the Villisca Axe Murder Home. Allenstown 4 Case. The Bear Brook murders, also known as the Allenstown 4 case, include 4 female American murder victims, 2 discovered in 1985 and 2 in 2000 near Bear Brook State Park in Allenstown, New Hampshire. All 4 victims were partially or totally skeletonized and presumed to have died between 1977 and 1981. On November 10, 1985, a hunter discovered a metal 55-gallon barrel near the burned-out store at Bear Brook State Park in Allenstown, New Hampshire. Inside were the plastic-wrapped bodies of an adult female and a little girl. Autopsies revealed that both passed away of blunt trauma. On May 9, 2000, the bodies of 2 young girls were discovered near the original finding location. These remains were likewise found in a metal 55-gallon barrel, and authorities think all 4 killings took place around the same time, despite detectives somehow missing the second drum in 1985. According to investigators, the second drum took so long to collect because it was positioned outside of the first crime scene. These children also suffered from blunt force trauma. In 2017, detectives identified Terry Peter Rasmussen as the most probable suspect. He was also identified as the father of a 2 to 4-year-old daughter who was among the Bear Brook victims through DNA testing. Rasmussen is suspected of many more killings, including that of his known lover Denise Baudin, who went missing in 1981. Rasmussen was convicted and imprisoned for the grisly killing of his then-wife, Yoon Soon-jun, in 2002. He passed away while in jail in 2010. In 2019, officials revealed that the 3 biologically related ladies had been identified as a mother, Marlise Elizabeth Honeychurch, and her 2 children from separate biological dads, Marie Elizabeth Vaughn and Sarah Lynn McWaters, who were last seen in November 1978. The middle kid, referred to as Rasmussen's daughter, has yet to be officially recognized.